Jason hated working the graveyard shift. The gas station sat on the edge of a nearly empty highway, miles from the nearest town. By day, it was just another roadside stop. But at night, with the lights buzzing overhead and the windows reflecting the empty parking lot, the place felt wrong. It was always quiet after midnight. Too quiet. Most nights, Jason passed the time scrolling on his phone or stocking shelves, listening to the hum of the coolers in the back. But some nights, things felt different. The shadows seemed heavier. The wind outside seemed to carry voices that weren't there. And then came the night he would never forget. It started like any other shift. A trucker bought coffee around 11 p.m. A couple came in for gas at 12:30. By 1 a.m., the highway was dead silent, the lot empty except for Jason's car parked under the flickering streetlight. He was restocking candy bars when he heard the door chime. Ding. He looked up expecting another late-night traveler. But no one was there. The door swung shut slowly behind empty air. Jason frowned, wiping his hands on his uniform. He checked the aisles, nothing. Maybe the wind had pushed it open. He turned back toward the counter and froze. A man was standing outside by the gas pumps. Not walking up, not getting gas, just standing there. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like he was studying the station, or Jason through the glass. Jason swallowed hard and reached for the phone, but when he glanced back out, the man was gone. The next hour dragged on. Every creak of the building made Jason jump. At 2:15, the door chime rang again. Ding. Jason spun around. This time, a man had actually come in. He was tall, wearing a dirty gray hoodie with the hood pulled low. He didn't look at Jason, didn't speak, just walked slowly up and down the aisles, hands hidden in his pockets. "Evening," Jason said, voice cracking slightly. The man didn't respond. Something about him felt off. It wasn't just the silence, it was the way he moved. Slow, deliberate steps, like each one took thought. Finally, the man approached the counter. Jason tried to keep his voice steady. "Find everything okay?" The man slowly looked up. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The man's eyes were wrong. Too wide, too dark. Like there weren't any whites at all, just black, endless pupils that swallowed the light. He smiled then. The smile was worse than the eyes. It was too big, too stretched, like the muscles didn't know how to make the shape properly. Jason's hand hovered near the phone. The man leaned forward slightly and whispered, voice scraping like dry leaves, "You shouldn't be here." And then he turned and walked out. Jason locked the door behind him, heart hammering. He watched as the man crossed the lot, moving slowly, disappearing into the dark beyond the streetlight. A few minutes later, headlights appeared. Relief washed over Jason as a state trooper walked in to buy coffee. Jason tried to explain what happened, but when he mentioned the man's face, the officer froze. "Tall guy? Gray hoodie? Weird smile?" the trooper asked. Jason nodded. The officer set his coffee down slowly. "We've had 3 calls tonight, people seeing him on the highway. He never speaks, just stands there watching." The trooper's voice dropped. "And the thing is, every time someone calls it in, there's no one there when we arrive." Jason quit the night shift the next day. He never drove that stretch of highway again. But sometimes, late at night, he swears he sees a figure in a gray hoodie at the edge of the road, just standing, watching. Eric had been renting the old 2-story house for almost 6 months. It was cheap, close to work, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. Just first month's rent and a promise not to throw loud parties. The only thing Eric didn't like was the basement. It wasn't finished, just concrete floors, brick walls, and one dangling light bulb that barely lit the stairs. The landlord told him to ignore it. Nothing down there but the water heater and some old junk, he'd said. Eric rarely thought about it until the noises started. The first time it was late after midnight. He was lying in bed when he heard it. Footsteps, slow, uneven, moving somewhere below him. At first he thought it was the pipes creaking or maybe a raccoon got in. The house was old. It made sounds. But then he realized the footsteps were too heavy, too human. The next morning, Eric checked the basement door. Still locked. He shook his head, laughed it off, and told himself he was imagining things. But the next night, the footsteps came again. This time, they stopped right under his bedroom. He barely slept after that. A week later, he asked his landlord about it. The man gave him a strange look. "There's no one down there," the landlord said flatly. "Hasn't been for years." Eric frowned. "What do you mean, hasn't been?" The landlord hesitated. "Just keep the door locked, son. Basement's not for tenants." That was it, no explanation. By the fourth night, Eric had enough. He sat in the living room with the lights off, waiting. Around 2 a.m., the sound started again. Faint footsteps on the concrete below. He grabbed a flashlight, unlocked the basement door, and crept down the stairs. The air was cold, damp. The single light bulb swung slightly overhead, casting long, twitching shadows across the walls. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. Halfway down, he stopped. There was something scratched into the concrete floor near the bottom step. Letters. He crouched down, running the flashlight beam across the floor. "Don't let him out!" Eric's mouth went dry. He turned slowly, and that was when he saw movement at the far end of the basement. A figure stood in the corner, too tall, too thin, face pale and eyes wide like he hadn't seen daylight in years. The thing smiled. Eric stumbled backward, heart pounding, as the figure took one slow step toward him, then another. He bolted up the stairs, slamming the door shut, locking it, shoving a chair under the handle. The footsteps followed to the other side. Slow, heavy, then nothing. The next morning, he told the landlord everything. The old man sighed. "I warned you," he said. "That door stays locked for a reason." When Eric demanded answers, the landlord just shook his head. "Some doors," he said quietly, "are better left closed." Eric moved out the next day, but the house never stayed empty for long. Because at night, neighbors swore they still saw a figure standing at the basement window, watching. Derek had always been the kind of person who found peace where most people found unease. The forest. He loved it. The isolation, the quiet, the way the rest of the world seemed to disappear once you left the pavement behind. When friends asked why he always camped alone, he'd laugh and say, "It's not the woods you should be afraid of, it's people." But that weekend changed everything. He parked his car at the trailhead just after noon on a Friday, strapped on his backpack, and hiked 5 miles deep into the state forest before setting up camp near a narrow, winding creek. The sun slipped through the tall pines and fractured beams, painting the forest floor in golden shadow. By the time Derek pitched his tent and got a small fire going, the sun was already sinking. A chorus of insects sang through the trees, and the breeze carried the smell of pine and damp earth. For a while it was perfect. Then, just as the last light began to fade, the forest changed. It started small. The wind died first, leaving the trees eerily still. Then the crickets fell silent one by one, until there was nothing but the soft crackle of the fire. And then he heard it, a faint, high-pitched whistle. 3 notes. Long, short, long. Derek froze. He glanced into the dark tree line, searching for movement, but saw nothing. Maybe another camper? But he hadn't seen a single soul on the trail all day. The whistle came again, same 3 notes. Then, after a pause, another whistle answered, farther away this time, like a reply. Derek threw a few extra logs on the fire, telling himself it was nothing. Maybe birds, maybe the wind slipping through hollow branches, but the unease stayed with him. Every few minutes he'd hear the faint whistle again. Always the same pattern. Always from a different direction. By midnight, Derek climbed into his tent, zipped the flap shut, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Not with the forest so deathly silent. Not with the feeling that something was out there. At 2:13 a.m., Derek woke with a start. He didn't know what had woken him until he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, circling his tent, his breath caught in his throat. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint, twitching light through the tent walls. The footsteps crunched slowly around the perimeter, pausing every few seconds. Then came a sound that made his skin crawl. A long, slow drag of fingernails down the nylon wall of the tent. Right beside his head. Derek didn't move, didn't breathe. The footsteps circled again. And again. Before finally retreating into the forest. For the rest of the night, Derek sat in the corner of the tent clutching the flashlight, waiting for dawn. At first light, he stepped outside expecting to see animal tracks. What he found made his stomach turn. Footprints, human, but the stride was wrong. Too long, like the legs were bent at strange angles, and the prints were sunk deep into the earth. Far deeper than any normal person should have been. He told himself it was time to leave. He packed quickly, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and started back toward the trailhead. But the feeling of being watched never left. Every so often he'd hear faint movement behind him, twigs snapping, leaves crunching, only to turn and find the forest still and empty. 2 miles from his car, he stopped dead in his tracks. On a tree trunk, carved nearly 30 feet above the ground in deep, jagged letters, was a single word. Freshly cut, sap dripping. His heart pounded in his ears. That was when he heard the whistle again. This time it was close. Too close. Long, short, long. Derek ran. Branches whipped his arms and face as he tore through the underbrush, backpack bouncing violently against his shoulders. Behind him, he swore he heard footsteps. Fast, heavy, matching his pace. When he finally broke through the tree line near the trailhead, he turned just once. Something stood at the edge of the forest. Tall, too thin, arms too long. The shadows clung to it like it didn't belong to this world at all. Derek dove into his car, slammed the door, and peeled out down the road. His hands shook on the wheel as he glanced in the rearview mirror. The thing hadn't moved. It just stood there, watching, whistling those 3 awful notes as the road curved out of sight. He never camped alone again, but sometimes at night, when the wind dies and the world goes quiet, Derek swears he hears that same whistle outside his window. Long, short, long. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.